Hello, and welcome to Human Ascension with Ellie. In 2001, Benjamin Creme stood before a small audience in New York City. An older man, soft spoken and gentle in his demeanor, Mr. Creme described a phenomenon of great change that would transform the world over the next 25 years. He talked about a significant number of elders who walked the earth and lived among the rest of us, who have already reached the end of human evolutionary experiences. There's nowhere else for them to go, he said. Once you've reached the end, well, you've reached the end. You have to make a decision about what needs to happen next in evolution. Do you go to a higher planet? Do you go to a higher solar system? Or do you devote the rest of your time to humanity as a gift by choosing to stay here on Earth so that you can help the rest of us to reach our evolutionary potential? Benjamin Creme described this group of fully evolved humans as working in partnership with a heavenly group of entities, all collectively representing a higher ruling entity of the heavens, who has plans for his collection of kingdoms. The human kingdom being one of them, and also the higher kingdoms, the lower kingdoms, and the vast collection of different forms of manifestation that his imagination and knowledge and creativity had brought into play on the many planets in the kingdoms that he controls. The elder brothers of humanity, the ones that Benjamin often referred to as the Brotherhood, handle and help to make the plan of our evolution a reality. The rest of us don't really know what's going on. Some of us might think we do, but in reality, the plan for our evolution is continuously evolving as well, according to Benjamin. As humanity grows and evolves and becomes capable of thinking and actioning in new ways, it gives rise to new ideas about how high humanity can rise in its evolution. An evolution that has become increasingly creative with greater and greater possibilities for humanity. The types of evolution that Benjamin Creme was talking about on this day in New York City in 2001 was an evolution in which humanity would become wiser and kinder, more creative, and more able to handle the niceties and the difficulties of the evolutionary plan. And also, as individual humans would begin to evolve individually, they would be brought on to help to implement the plan of humanity's collective evolution by supporting others to also reach their potential. According to Benjamin, since the beginning of the time of planet Earth, there's been a plan underway that has been unfolding behind the scenes. The plan involves a kind of spiritual hierarchy. At the top of the hierarchy is the Brotherhood of humans who've already reached the full evolutionary potential. They've evolved as far as they can go. These humans are masters of wisdom, and even within this top group, there are some humans who have risen to the very top of the top of the top and could be considered to be lords of compassion. And the very top human in this top group of top humans is a man referred to as Lord Maitreya. There are three humans who've risen to the top, three lords of compassion, and Maitreya has risen to what Benjamin calls the Christ principle. Maitreya embodies the energy of love, and he is the Lord of love, the number one of the three. In his 2001 New York speech, Benjamin Creme begins to recount a story of how Maitreya appeared 2,000 years ago at the time of the baptism of Jesus Christ. And at the point of the baptism, he entered into Jesus and gave him the power of the Christ principle for a total of 3 years until the time that Jesus was crucified. So, in fact, Jesus was the observer and the manifester of Christ that had taken over his body for a set period of time. But the actual energy of Christ is eternal and has taken other forms as well and manifested into other people in other ways through other humans in previous and in later times. Benjamin Creme has passed on now. He was already quite old when he gave his speech in New York. But he continued to live until 2016 when he passed away peacefully at home in London, surrounded by his family. So, who was Benjamin Creme? Well, he was Scottish born in 1922 and he spent his early life as an artist. He blended up his love of art with his love of esotericism. At the age of 13, Benjamin began painting. His art was inspired by the great master Rembrandt and others. And a few years later, at the age of 16, Benjamin actually left school to pursue his passion for painting art full time. His style evolved into an abstract representation of esoteric principles inspired by many religious and spiritual concepts and the relationship between the earth and the cosmos. During his life, Benjamin's art was exhibited by galleries all over the world. At the age of 14, Benjamin became interested in the occult when he first read a book by Alexandra David Neal, which was called With Mystics and Magicians in Tibet. He went on to study famous occultists, including Helena Blavatsky, Alice Bailey, Krishnamurti, and Yogananda, just to name a few. What Benjamin was pursuing was the greatest knowledge that he could get about whether there might be the existence of a kingdom beyond anything previously encountered by humanity. And these masters of spirituality and the occult, despite their many varying perspectives, all seem to converge on a single principle that Benjamin found fascinating. And that was the principle of a spiritual kingdom that he learned to refer to as the fifth kingdom on earth, that Benjamin grew to understand was here for the purpose of helping humanity's evolution since the very beginning of humanity's initial creation. It was 1959 when Benjamin Creme claimed that he was first contacted telepathically by an entity that he referred to as his master. The master instructed him to make tape recordings of the messages that he was receiving, and Benjamin did as he was instructed. He taped many messages over the next 15 years, all of which he kept to himself. He didn't share any of these messages with anyone until many years later in 1975, when he first began speaking of his experiences in his local Friends Meeting House in London. The Friends Meeting House was just an ordinary house, but it had become a custom for the occupants to open their house up for people who wished to worship their faith without the constriction of any particular religion. The concept of a Friends Meeting House was actually, it started with the Quakers, and it was something that had been initiated in England in around the early 17th century by the Quakers, and over time it grew into a tradition that had spread to other countries of the world and had broadened in its spiritual reach. The London Friends Meeting House, just a short walk from Euston train station, was a simple place without the usual religious adornments, but it was popular, and Benjamin's recounting of spiritual messages was heard by many people well until the 1980s. Actually, even quite deep into the 1980s. The central theme of the messages that Benjamin Creme claimed to have received was the promise of an emergence of a group of enlightened spiritual teachers called the Ascendant Masters. These Ascendant Masters would guide humanity forward into a new phase called the Age of Aquarius, which would develop over time to become an age of peace and brotherhood, based on the principles of love and sharing. At the head of this group of masters would be a man who occupies the office of Christ, Maitreya, the very same Maitreya that is generally referred to as Buddha, or has become embodied in other worshipped figures such as Jesus Christ to Christians, or Imam Mahdi to Muslims, or the Messiah to Jews. Maitreya is the world teacher who all of the world's religions have been waiting for since the earliest teachings of their faith began. And it's true, almost all of the world's religions believe in an entity who is destined to return to earth and reconnect with mankind for the purpose of delivering those of us who have lived righteously, not speaking for myself necessarily, and to deliver the righteous back to a better time or to a new age of humanity and its evolution. Benjamin was very clear, though, in his understanding of the messages that he'd received. And that was that the world teacher would only return when humanity began to live right with one another. Most notably, humanity would need to live in peace and begin to share the world's resources more equitably. And this is, on the face of it, in direct contrast with how humanity has seemed to evolve since Benjamin received his first messages in 1959. So, what does this mean then? Well, Benjamin was instructed to embark on a mission to get the interest of other people and allow them to pursue the truth of the world teacher, or this human manifestation of the entity Maitreya themselves. So that the existence of Maitreya could be proven firsthand by people who've directly observed him, by anyone really who wished to discover him for themselves directly. So in 1982, Benjamin began buying newspaper advertisements that simply said, and I quote, "The Christ is now here," unquote. He bought those advertisements in newspapers all over the world, and I actually remember seeing those ads myself. I saw ads like that when I was young, and I was looking for jobs in the newspaper. Back in the 1980s, that's how finding a job was done. You would have to wait for the newspaper to arrive, and then you'd turn to the classified section to scour the job ads and look for something that might suit you. I was just out of high school back then, and I was constantly looking for temporary office work. And I would spend a lot of my time with my head in the classified pages. I remember seeing weird little ads that simply said, "Christ is now here." And that's it. No explanation, no further info, no contact number or anything. And I remember thinking to myself, why would this person put an ad like that in the paper if that's the only thing it says? It's very perplexing, isn't it? But it seems I wasn't the only person who noticed. Members of the media also noticed. And when Benjamin suddenly changed the wording of his advertisements so that they read slightly differently and said, "Christ is returning in 2 months," well, this really got the media's attention. Benjamin's announcements in the paper grew in frequency and urgency, and in May of 1982, he found himself appearing at a press conference in Los Angeles, California, with nearly 100 reporters in attendance, everyone asking him to elaborate on his newspaper announcements. Benjamin explained that Maitreya was the energy of the highest spiritual element, and that he had returned to walk among mankind on earth and was living in a bustling Asian community called Brick Lane in London at that precise moment in time. Benjamin explained that he had been sent on a task of underscoring the importance of humanity involving themselves directly in the event of trying to find Maitreya. He couldn't lead the people to Maitreya. The people would have to seek Maitreya out directly. But he assured everyone at the press conference that day in May of 1982 that if they went on a search for Maitreya, whether as an embodiment through Buddha or Christ or Imam Mahdi or the Messiah, they would certainly find him. That was guaranteed, because Maitreya was here waiting to be found. But the most important thing was that humanity's free will must lead the way towards discovery, because the free will that had been bestowed upon humanity was the path towards spiritual fulfillment. It was therefore sacrosanct, and there could be no other way for humanity to find its future. So Benjamin Creme had presented the world's media with a challenge for itself, but also for the entire world. And the challenge was for mankind to make a serious attempt to research the story that he had told them and to locate Maitreya in London for themselves. And he assured them that if they embarked on this journey, they would certainly find Maitreya, because Maitreya wanted to be found. He was waiting to be found. Sometime after the press conference, Benjamin Creme reported that he had been hoping that the media would respond to his information in an active way, but sadly they didn't. Instead, they just reported the story in the way that they normally do, something along the lines of, a British man tells Los Angeles media that Christ is living nearby in busy London markets. They never went so far as to ever get involved in searching for Maitreya themselves, or to prove or disprove Benjamin's story. A few years later, Benjamin contacted British media again. He had managed to get the attention of Britain's largest and most well-respected media organisation. We've all heard of it, the BBC. And the BBC had agreed to embark on an investigation into the messages received by Benjamin and his claims of Maitreya living in London. Later, in a 2010 book, Benjamin wrote that the UK monarchy and the highest religious and governmental officials in Britain actively prevented the BBC investigation from continuing. And so, whilst it had begun, it was cut off completely in its early investigative stages. Benjamin's allegation of interference by the British power brokers was confirmed in part by archived documents located by an online blogger and author by the name of Alcuin Bramerton. Alcuin writes for children, but also has other blogs that are dedicated to reporting stories that are generally missed by the mainstream media or which may be considered conspiratorial by nature. On 5th of July 2024, Alcuin wrote the following in one of his blogs. I'm going to quote, and it is relatively lengthy. So here we go. Christ has quietly returned. He has been based in the Asian community of London in the UK since July of 1977. He is in physical form, visible in the third dimension, and photographable. Jesus has also returned. He has been based in the suburbs of Rome in Italy since 1984. Christ and Jesus, you see, contrary to received church mythologies, are actually two separate human beings with two separate personal evolutions on earth. They work closely together on spiritual, social, and humanitarian initiatives across the world. Each is a resurrected and ascendant master. Each is an active healer. Another name or title for Christ is the Maitreya Buddha. He is the world teacher recognized by various names in many different spiritual and religious traditions. He's not a religious figure. He does not want followers or worshippers. He never has, and neither has Jesus. In the mid-1980s, Christ made himself known to the BBC in London. He had 3 meetings in person in Broadcasting House there in January, February, and March of 1986 in the run-up to Easter. Present at those meetings were the BBC Director General, Alastair David Gordon-Milne, and several of his senior colleagues, and some of them are still active at the BBC. The fact and content of the BBC meeting with Christ were minuted. Those papers still exist in at least 3 different locations. Several of the people who drafted them or edited them or circulated them or saw them at the time are still active at the BBC. The official papers are lodged at the BBC Written Archive Centre at Caversham Park in Reading in Berkshire, the Lambeth Palace Library in London, and at the Royal Archives at Windsor Castle, Round Tower in Berkshire. A substantial, scattered and varied secondary or derivative literature is also still in existence. One of the things which Christ did when he spoke to the BBC and the top brass there was, with their permission, demonstrate a spiritual technology which indicated his bona fide identity. He showed them a series of immersive holographic scenes. These he produced on his own, without the aid of any physical technologies. The BBC executives were shown the last hours of Jesus on the cross, as if they were there themselves as witnesses. The BBC people witnessed the crucifixion. They saw it with their own eyes. They experienced it. They saw and heard and smelled and felt the whole scene, the suffering, the blood, the people present, the languages used, the emotions, and even the location. On another occasion, at another of the BBC meetings, Christ asked Jesus to also attend with him, and he did. The BBC manager sat in a room with both Christ and Jesus and spoke to each of them. The upshot of all of this was that the BBC agreed with Christ to mount a big press conference during Easter of 1986, at which he would appear, talk to the journalists, and answer all of their questions. However, the BBC decided that they should do something else first. They decided to bring the matter to the attention of Queen Elizabeth II in her capacity as head of church and state. It was kind of a big deal, so of course they did. Technically, the Queen is Defender of the Faith and Supreme Governor of the Church of England, and the Church claims an old historical link with perceptions about Christ and Jesus. The Queen and her senior staff, and probably one of her Anglican chaplains, undertook to bring the matter to the attention of the archbishops and bishops of the Church of England, and to seek advice from them. At least one meeting took place, attended by the Archbishop of Canterbury, Robert Alexander Kennedy Runcie, and the Archbishop of York, John Stapleton Habgood. Other senior bishops were also there, including the Bishop of Durham, whose name is David Edward Jenkins, and the Bishop of London, whose name is Graham Douglas Leonard. It's thought that the BBC was represented by Alistair Milne for at least the first part of that meeting. Several of the people who participated are still alive. So the result of the royal consultation was that the bishops advised the Queen that the two individuals which the BBC had met and talked with could not possibly have been Christ or Jesus. Such epiphanies would not have taken place without the bishops themselves knowing something about them in advance through the elite church conduits. And so the matter was dropped. No announcement or press conference was arranged by the BBC. No thought for the day was mentioned at all. There was a complete embargo on the entire issue, and we never heard anything again. The pertinent papers have still not been released, even though the event took place more than 30 years ago. That's what he wrote. So to support his blog post, Alcuin refers to Benjamin's 2010 recounting of this event in his book, which was called Maitreya's Mission, Volume 1. He also refers to another account made in 2005. But when I went to see that online resource that was cited, the relevant website had been removed, so I can't confirm that. There was, however, a long list of other examples of how Maitreya had been located in other areas of the world. In one example, he spoke openly to 6,000 people in Africa. In another example, he spoke to press at an event in France. And then another example, much briefer, actually a number of examples, included encounters in a variety of places in the world, including the US, the UK, Italy, and more. On each occasion, Maitreya identified himself whilst being embodied inside a different person with a similar profound message at a significant public event in which humanity has a large stake in the outcome of the event. So Alcuin, the blogger, made sure that he linked everything that he said to some kind of documented source. And every single source link appeared to work when I tested it, except any of the links that referred back to Share International Foundation. And as it happens, Share International Foundation is the foundation that was created by Benjamin Creme and to which Benjamin worked as editor until his passing in 2016. That's interesting in itself. So let's talk a little bit about Share International Foundation then, because it is Share International Foundation that primarily keeps the messages shared by Benjamin Krim alive, so long after his passing. So, Share International Foundation is a not for profit organization in London, still operating, and founded originally by Benjamin Krim in the 1980s. It has sister organizations operating in Amsterdam, Tokyo, and the United States at Berkeley in California. Share International describes itself to be a worldwide network of individuals whose purpose is to make known the fact that Maitreya, the world teacher for the coming age, and his group, the Masters of Wisdom, are now among us. According to Share International, Maitreya continues to live in London in the same Asian community that he was residing in during Benjamin's time in around about 1977, and that he is presently in the process of emerging into the world publicly by working directly with people who have evolved high enough to help humanity in its collective evolution. Now, it's important to note that despite being 93 and about to die, until his very last breath, Benjamin Krim was asserting that Maitreya is going to be making himself known worldwide in what he described was imminent. Even today, Share International claims that Maitreya had been living in a retreat in the Himalayas for some time before he relocated to reside in London. Share International still operates as it has always done, even now, which is 8 years after Benjamin's death. It publishes a monthly magazine, which it also calls Share International, which brings together ancient ways of knowing and contemporary thinking. It considers the causes of underlying social, economic, political, and spiritual changes now occurring on a global scale, and it seeks to inspire practical and compassionate actions, which include activism, social justice, integrous journalism, and planetary healing. I remember the monthly Share International Foundation magazine publications from when I was younger. I think it might have been delivered to homes at the time, actually, or perhaps it was a kind of magazine that you'd often see at the doctor's waiting room or something like that, because, or maybe even in the school cafeteria or something like that. I'm not sure why I remember it as well as I do, as though I've seen it a lot in my younger years, but I certainly remember it. I haven't seen it recently, though. But one thing I know for sure about Share International's magazine, you would never see it in a church or any kind of religious organization, not unless it was snuck in somehow like a kind of contraband. Because generally, the major religions of the world, or at the very least, the Christian religions of the world, are opposed to Share International and also opposed to the messages shared by Benjamin Krim. It's always been that way, going right back to the 1980s when Benjamin first appeared on the scene. For example, there are a small number of evangelical Christian churches that are open to discussing the principles that have been discussed by Benjamin Krim and Share International Foundation. But in its majority, the evangelical movement is strongly opposed to the concept of Maitreya, even going so far as to refer to the term Maitreya being a pseudonym for the Antichrist. Popular evangelical author and Detroit area attorney, I think her name is Constance Cumbry, has openly described Maitreya as being the Antichrist and Share International as an openly satanic movement, which seems quite an extreme accusation to make about an organization that hopes to inspire a gentler handling of the earth, shared equity of earthly resources, and more kindness and support of the collective humanity. Constance wrote her accusations in a book that she wrote in 1983 called The Hidden Dangers of the Rainbow, the New Age Movement and Our Coming Age of Barbarism. I'm actually going to move on from this in a moment, but I can't resist reading a passage from Constance Cumbry's book, which I found quoted online. Listen to this. Okay. So The New Age movement has infiltrated all of Christianity as well as Judaism, and it is the motivating force behind holistic health centers, New Thought, humanistic psychology, Montessori schools, modernism, secular humanism, and zero population growth. Unitarian churches and health food stores become New Age recruiting centers, and the Guardian Angels become one of the New Age movement's paramilitary organizations, and the New Age movement has complete identity with the programs of Hitler. The New Age movement is not simply expressing a naive or unscripted interest in metaphysics. It is an organized conspiracy to overthrow the United States and replace it with a Nazi-like regime. While there are certain superficial similarities among most religious Orthodox Judaism and Christianity, that it stands in direct opposition to every other belief system. It's safe to say, however, that nearly all non-Judeo-Christian religions are extremely similar because, as the Bible indicates, they come from one source, which is the God of this world, which is Satan himself. Now, I have to give you a caveat. I'm going to admit that I haven't read Constance Cumbry's book myself. I'm only reading what I have found quoted online, so it might not be an exact word-for-word quote. But the overall principle is clear, and that is the way that it does appear here, that it seems to show a mindset of someone who automatically believes that if you aren't a Jew or a Christian, you must be a person whose beliefs are guided by Satan. And if you're someone like me, who squarely falls into the old-fashioned term New Age, I guess, then I guess I'm being called out almost by name here as being a Satan worshipper, which I'm certainly not. Very strong language indeed, and from a lawyer, which is probably the most surprising aspect of these quotes from the book, if in fact they are accurate quotes, because I do have to say that time restricted me from being able to read the book directly. I guess it wouldn't be too hard to find out, though. I might actually see if I can find a copy of Constance's book in the library next time I'm fishing around for a bit of light reading. Anyway, I'm not sure that I will, but if I ever see her book, I will certainly open it up to take a look. But what do we make of the claims by Benjamin Creme and Share International Foundation? So I did quite a few searches on Benjamin Creme to see what people might have said about their encounters with him over the years. And interestingly, everyone who has written about meeting Benjamin almost universally describes him as being very likable, a very likable man who's gentle in his demeanor and who calmly discussed a wide variety of esoteric topics such as faith, UFOs and extraterrestrials, spirituality, prophecy, and the ancient wisdoms of Greece and Rome. Many of the things he said seemed outlandish or reaching far beyond any normal range of comprehension. But the way in which he delivered his messages was calm and measured and earnest and almost reassuring. Before his death, Benjamin increasingly described the emergence of Maitreya as something that would occur gradually. He insisted that it was not going to be a distinctive single event, but was designed to be a gradual, intentional process of discovery. The reason, he explained, was that Maitreya and the Masters of Wisdom did not want to infringe on humanity's free will. Instead, we are left to learn from our mistakes as needed, or even to repeat our mistakes as often as it takes to finally get it right, and to be in a position to evolve to a higher kingdom of existence. Now, when I think about all of the things covered so far in today's episode, I can't help noting that Maitreya is the name given to the fifth Buddha, who is the Buddha figure that appears in the Buddhism tradition today. So I went on a search to find out more about what the Buddhists say about Maitreya, to see if there is any comparison or similarity to the messages presented by Benjamin Creme. This is what I found. So in Buddhism teachings, there are a procession of Buddhas who follow each other across time. The current Buddha is Gautama Buddha, I hope I'm saying that correctly, who appears during a period of time during which humanity has lost its connection to the Dharma, which is the enlightened Buddhist teaching. Actually, Dharma is more complex than just one thing. It relates to a variety of concepts that all fall within the Buddhist teachings. Dharma includes the Buddhist teachings that help humans to evolve and to transcend beyond things of a material nature, such as pain and suffering, for example. It also relates to the nature laws that govern the universe and the truth about the nature of reality and the way things really are. Dharma is also about the ethical conduct that humans should follow, things like mental discipline, the pursuit of wisdom, and ethical behavior. And Dharma also is a message that in order to achieve Dharma, it should be experienced in one's life and cannot be achieved with study. It must be practiced by the individual. So you can't reach Dharma through knowledge. You have to do it through practice. Today's Buddha is present to witness the collapse of humanity's adherence to Buddhist principles related to Dharma. There is no judgment of us, merely an acceptance that the current Buddha is here for this moment. Maitreya is believed to be the next Buddha who is present for humanity's reconnection to Dharma and its return to a higher direction of travel. In Buddhism, Maitreya is an enlightened being who's chosen to remain in the continuous cycle of birth and death and rebirth so that he can help others to achieve enlightenment. And he's chosen to do that rather than to move on to a higher existence. The word Maitreya comes from the Sanskrit word matri, which means friendliness or loving kindness. Buddhists believe that Maitreya currently resides in a celestial realm called Tushita Heaven, where all Buddhas dwell before they're chosen to descend to earth. The signs that the Maitreya is about to appear are described in Buddhist prophecies and involve an era of decline during which the Dharma has been largely forgotten or disregarded by humanity. His arrival will involve teachings very similar to the current teachings of Buddha, related to kindness, love, compassion, and the path towards enlightenment. Maitreya is a universally accepted concept in Buddhism, with all branches of the faith believing his role being that of the enlightened being who helps humanity to restore its purity of spirit and spiritual awakening. And so basically, the messages of Buddhism and Benjamin Creme are very much the same when it comes to Maitreya in every respect, except, of course, that Buddhists believe that Maitreya is awaiting his time up in Tushita Heaven, and Benjamin believed him to be living in a highly populated market area of London. Big difference. Unless, of course, the Buddhist prophecy has already unfolded, and maybe Maitreya is indeed already on Earth and doing the work with humanity that he was always expected to do, because, of course, that is a possibility. I mean, why not now? Why does his arrival and the restoration of humanity's path towards enlightenment have to happen in the future? Could it already be happening one day at a time, one person at a time? I mean, who are we to decide what the rules are for how humanity is going to continue its evolution? If we've already got one toe in the age of Aquarius, then it makes sense that Maitreya might already be here. So there is another thing to consider when it comes to Benjamin Creme, and that is, it should be noted that during the first few years of his active esoteric practices, Benjamin Creme was the vice president of an organization called the Aetherius Society. The Aetherius Society was formed by a British fellow called George King back in the 1950s as a result of what he claimed were contacts that he had or encounters that he had with extraterrestrial beings that he referred to as the cosmic masters. The Aetherius Society describes these cosmic masters as having come from civilizations very ancient, beyond conception, which exist on higher planes of existence on other planets in our solar system. They are millions of years ahead of us technologically and spiritually, which means that they have evolved to a higher frequency of vibration as yet undetected by terrestrial science. In other words, if NASA were to land an astronaut on Mars tomorrow, for example, that astronaut would not see the intelligences that live there unless those intelligent beings specifically chose to lower their vibration and make their presence known. They just can't be detected by us with our current awareness. The cosmic masters are termed masters because they have mastered themselves. They have made contact with the God spark within them. This contact with their own higher selves gives them true wisdom and great spiritual powers, which they use to help others. And it's at this point where everything in today's episode suddenly starts to come together with previous episodes in which we've looked at the recycling of sun gods and the relationship or potential relationship between visions of religious deities and ET encounters, and even claims that Jesus was once replaced with an alien after he died on the crucifix, which is why he suddenly was able to walk through walls and levitate and other unearthly things that he couldn't seem to do before that time. The Aetherius Society also claims that these cosmic masters, who are millions of years ahead of us, technologically and spiritually, who can only be seen by us if they choose to be seen, have even been born among us with a kind of hybrid human and non-human blood and a cosmic blood residing in a single terrestrial bound body. And the examples of these kinds of cosmic earthbound masters, half human, half extraterrestrial, include Jesus and Buddha and Krishna and Confucius and Moses and Saint Peter and others. Isn't that something? It sure would explain a lot if it were true, wouldn't it? It would explain how so many religious organizations around the world believe in a different entity who they claim embodied the same spiritual God or Christ like principles and the same messaging as contained in competing or non affiliated religions. And it would explain how different ages of humanity followed different gods, but all with a unifying link to a single cosmos, the principles of which have remained unchanged for many thousands of years. I've often listened to the way that Christian teachings, whether it be from the Old Testament or the New Testament, seem to be a different perspective of the teachings that appear in the Gnostic or unrecognized Gospels like Enoch and Judas and the Gospel of Mary. And also some of the better known messages that derive from historical visions of the Mother of Christ, or Chris Bledsoe's Lady in White, because I haven't forgotten about him either, and countless other examples of sightings and experiences, messages, prophecies, and encounters, whether spiritual, extraterrestrial, or angelic, or ghostly by nature. The messages are always the same, no matter where they come from or how they're interpreted. We can't seem to get away from that single message. And the message is humanity is being told to change for its own good, to be kind to the planet and to be kind to each other and to follow softer practices in one's own life, to share the resources of the earth equally among the entire world, to be kinder, peaceful, and spiritual rather than material in nature, and that these are the secrets to humanity's evolution. There's also another belief belonging to the Aetherius Society, which sits in complete alignment with some of today's conspiracy theories that many people laugh at, and it's twofold in nature. The first aspect relates to the belief by many that extraterrestrial beings are already residing on Earth and have already been in contact with many of the world's governing bodies and are helping to guide the world forward. Some of the theories claim that these extraterrestrials are a positive force, trying to move humanity forward with things like advanced technology and improved scientific practices. Other theories are centered around these extraterrestrial beings being a malignant force that are controlling our governments and preventing advancement of the human race. The Etheria Society also claims that what it refers to as space beings have contacted the leading governments of the world in many ways to either assist or control earthly outcomes, and that a sinister group exists among these space beings, which it refers to as the Silence Group. The Society claims that the Silence Group includes darker forces of combined humans and extraterrestrials who are manipulating information and events to ensure that humanity remains uninformed or misinformed as to the true nature of what is happening around us. The Etheria Society states that this silent group is a dark force that uses fear and ignorance to control humanity. And that's exactly what I've referred to in so many previous episodes of this show. This information coming from so many sources, whether recent sources or even sources from thousands of years prior. Just think about last week, for example, when I referred to the Adam and Eve situation in the Garden of Eden, a very well documented example of there being an attempt to prevent humans from gaining knowledge. Or Chris Bledsoe's encounters with the Lady in White, who appeared to him in 2012 and declared that soon we would be experiencing an intervention of sorts, where the many secrets suppressed over the past 2,000 years in order to keep us subservient to a dark force with the use of fear and ignorance would be revealed to help us to learn and decide how to rise above our current existence. And the teachings of Marshall V. Summers and the Allies of Humanity, who claim exactly the same dark forces that are in play, but that they exist within extraterrestrials who are so much more advanced than we are that they don't bother blowing us up. They just manipulate us into thinking that they're on our side and are doing us a favor. So, there's so much to this story. And we don't need to resolve all of the mysteries of the universe in a single hour. It's a bit like trying, actually, even as I'm kind of planning today's episode, I'm thinking it's a bit like trying to unravel a big ball of string after my cat has been left alone to play with it for a few hours, under the house or something, maybe even for a couple of days. It's all ripped to shreds in places, and whatever sections of string still remain intact are tangled and knotted together in an impossible mess of dust and bugs and mud and bird feathers and just nameless goo. And probably spider webs as well. And who knows, maybe even a few live spiders, or at least bits of spider tangled up with everything else. Trying to figure out what's happening around us is a bit like trying to unravel that ball of mucky, ripped up string that my cat's gotten hold of. There are people out there who talk about this kind of thing with what appears to be the utmost confidence. They say that they've seen the masters, they've heard the messages directly, they know the future, and they can see the fate of humanity. But not one of these people seems to know how to explain everything in a way that humanity can use in a practical sense and sort of safely guide itself into the future. Other than, of course, to say that we must be kinder to each other and protect the planet and put our differences aside and live a more spiritual, less material existence. Yes, we already know that. We know. So why are we hearing the same messages again and again and again, and with no instruction manual attached to be able to implement it and actually get it done? Is it really just a matter of free will? Are we supposed to figure it out and will ourselves forward? So bear with me, because this is going to sound like it's coming out of left field a little, but I do think that it's quite closely related when you really think about it. It's going to just seem a bit strange. I recently came across an online resource called Ground News. It's only a small example of how humanity might just have a way of getting back in control of our knowledge and the ability to think freely enough to get a process of spiritual awakening happening. I've heard of Ground News before because quite a few YouTube influencers have been promoting it as a product on their channels. And I took an interest in it because I talk about news stories a lot on my own YouTube channel. And I wondered if the Ground News product might be a helpful resource for me personally. So I took a little look around and immediately realized that this is actually far more valuable to me or to any person that it even claims to be. I don't think they realize over at Ground News just how groundbreaking this could be. Because what the Ground News app does is that it uses artificial intelligence and the online algorithms to find out all of the information that exists about a single news story, any news story, about any topic from any source in the world. It collects it all into one place, and the algorithm summarizes it into 3 or 4 brief bullet points. And then it lists all of the sources that it used to get those bullet points. And so that's all of the news forums that have been discussing the subject. It shows how the story appeared in each news forum, what the political or opinion-based slant might be, how it links to other opinions or political slants, and what the general facts actually appear to be, along with how reliable or trustworthy each source has been in the past. It kind of gives you a chance to really see how every topic under the sun is being spinned and what all the different spins are so that you can quietly and quickly figure out what's real and what's unlikely to be real. And it's dirt cheap because it's just an algorithm. And so once the program has been created, all it takes is a few maintenance guys in the back office making sure that the algorithm stays healthy. So as soon as I realized how valuable and easy to use the Ground News product is, I created a 20-minute instructional video, which I shared with my viewers on YouTube. A simple video showing how to read news in a new way so that you can actually figure out what's real news and what's just another attempt to manipulate your thinking. The video shows both left and right sides of the political spectrum at work, plus the middle, and how they're trying to mold the public perception and create confusion. And the video was a massive hit with my audience because suddenly everyone watching it could see right through the BS. I'm actually going to include a link to my video that I created in the description for this episode because it's actually interesting and it's kind of fun and very eye-opening. And the algorithm lets you do this for anything related to news. So on any topic, it doesn't have to be politics or anything like that. It could relate to anything anywhere in the world. I wish, and the reason why I'm raising this is that I wish there was a similar algorithm when it comes to the existence of reality, the messages for humanity, and the fate of our future. Although I have to say, it's looking promising because the other day, as it happens, the Ground News app sent me a spontaneous update in my inbox from the world of archaeology in Egypt. And that's what gave me the idea to mention it today as something that could be related to spiritual, paranormal, or esoteric in some way, and how it might be a wonderful resource for us to understand what we're doing here. The algorithm reported that new ancient ruins in Egypt have just been discovered this week, and that they fill a small gap in our knowledge about our ancient past. Just another little piece in the puzzle of reality that's been resolved by an algorithm relating to news. I was reading the article and thinking to myself, gosh, wouldn't it be a glorious thing if this algorithm existed for humanity's questions in general? Wouldn't it be just the most glorious thing? Wouldn't it be a wonderful thing if the world's mysteries were all unraveled into 2 lovely, neat columns of either real or spin of some kind? I actually have a feeling that a lot of what we sometimes believe is nonsense is actually much closer to the facts than what we sometimes believe to be true. Lucky for you and me, I guess, I'm not professing to be an expert in any of the information that I'm sharing with you in this show. I'm just hungry to know what's going on around me. And my hunger for knowledge and for more understanding could take this show into any direction. And of course, I love a deep, dark rabbit hole as well. You never know what you're going to find. I just think that sometimes we answer a lot on the show, but also so many questions remain. And all I'm looking for is evidence of who we are to help us to understand where we're going as we ascend. What's the next step for humanity? And the more I dig, the deeper the hole gets. It just never seems to end. If you'd like me to look at a particular subject that you believe might help us to answer some of these questions about why humanity was created, our place in the universe, and our evolutionary future, then email me directly at elliedreamsdoneunder@gmail.com. I'm also on the search for informed individuals who might like to help fill the gaps and discuss many of these concepts in person. If you're one of those informed individuals, then let me know. Maybe we can have a lovely little chat on the show that takes us one step closer to the world understanding everything it needs to know. Because I think that would be great. It would be really, really great. My name is Ellie, and you can find me at Ellie Dreams Down Under on YouTube. That's it for today. It's been a pleasure. Until next time.